The studio smelled of old smoke and ambition, the kind that never quite fades. Once, Studio One had been the heartbeat of Radio Zenith, London's late-night soul. The gold plaques on the wall shimmered faintly in the dim light, relics from the decades when Marcus Vale's voice had ruled the airwaves. That voice, smooth, rhythmic, commanding, had once been described as London's lullaby. It could charm, seduce, or scold. It could make a listener feel seen in the dark. Now, that same voice was the centerpiece of The Crown versus Marcus Vale. It had taken nearly 4 decades for the whispers to become headlines, for the murmurs of unprofessional behavior and inappropriate mentorship to turn into 4 charges of rape, and 7 women willing to put their names to the word victim. The date stretched back to 1983, when vinyl ruled the radio and Vale's reign began. The allegations spanned generations, echoing through the industry like feedback no one wanted to hear. Vale sat in his penthouse on the morning of his arraignment, staring at the Thames through tinted glass. His reflection hovered in the window, silver dreadlocks tied back, heavy gold rings glinting faintly in the grey light. For a moment, he could almost hear the hum of the studio again, the red on-air sign, the applause of a world that once adored him. Then came the silence. In 1983, Marcus Vale was the voice every aspiring artist wanted to reach. He was 25, full of swagger, dressed in tailored jackets and gold chains. When he spoke, even silence seemed to listen. His show, Urban Frequency, was the new pulse of the city, a cultural bridge between London streets and its airwaves. For young black artists, he was both gatekeeper and godfather. And Marcus revelled in it. That was the year Leanne Porter met him. She was 17, fresh from Brixton, clutching a homemade demo tape wrapped in notebook paper. Her voice had the rasp of raw talent, the kind that needed only a chance. When she stood outside Radio Zenith's glass doors, watching Marcus arrive in his silver convertible, she thought she was meeting destiny. He noticed her instantly, the shy way she held herself, the glimmer of hope. "You sing?" he'd asked, his voice smooth as the bass line that followed every sentence. She nodded. "Then you're already halfway there," he said, flashing a smile that could bend light. That night, he invited her to the studio after hours. He said he wanted to hear what London sounds like in her voice. Under the warm hum of the recording booth, she sang, nervous at first, then freer. Marcus clapped slowly, telling her she had it. That word, it, would replay in her mind for years. He offered her a drink to calm her nerves. Told her she was special. Told her not to tell anyone about their little session. When he touched her shoulder, she froze. When he locked the studio door, she didn't breathe. By the time she left, dawn had broken. The streets outside glistened with rain. She walked home without her tape. Years turned into decades. Vale's star only rose. By the early 2000s, he was everywhere: radio, television, festivals. His voice introduced global acts, his opinions shaped careers. He spoke about empowering youth through sound, while collecting honorary degrees for his cultural influence. Yet behind the applause were staffers who whispered, interns who quit quietly, women who never came back after private sessions. Leanne had built a small life, a steady job, a modest flat, a family. But some nights, she'd wake up to the sound of a radio in her dream, that voice saying her name, the word special dripping like poison. She had buried it deep, until one evening she saw a headline online, radio icon accused of predatory behavior. The journalist was Rachel Irons, an investigative reporter known for her calm persistence. Rachel had begun digging into complaints about misconduct in the entertainment industry. At first, the names were small, the cases buried in bureaucracy. Then someone mentioned Marcus Vale. Rachel's first call to Leanne went unanswered. The second went to voicemail. On the third, Leanne picked up. "I know what this is about," she said quietly. Rachel didn't need to ask how she knew. Leanne paused before adding, "He took my voice. Maybe it's time I take it back." That night, Rachel listened for hours as Leanne spoke, haltingly at first, then with growing clarity, painting a picture of manipulation disguised as mentorship. When the call ended, Rachel stared at her notes. 7 names. 1 man. 30 years of silence. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning. Unheard voices, the women behind the legend. Rachel Irons' name sat beneath the headline, and the internet caught fire. The piece outlined years of misconduct, incidents spanning the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. The stories were different, but the pattern was identical: mentorship, isolation, coercion, silence. Each woman thought she was the only one. Each had been told, "You owe me your voice." Within hours, the station issued a statement denying all claims. Vale's legal team called it a coordinated character assassination. Social media split in half, fans defending their icon, others calling for his arrest. Radio Zenith suspended his show pending investigation, but the silence of the network spoke louder than any press release. Among those who read the story was Nia Thompson, a former intern from 1999. Back then, she had been a university student studying sound engineering. Vale had taken her under his wing, praising her ear for rhythm. He'd given her backstage passes, promised introductions, and invited her to private studio sessions. One night, he asked her to stay late to fine-tune a mix. When she arrived, the door locked behind her. 2 decades later, Nia still couldn't hear his name without flinching. When she contacted Rachel, her voice trembled but her words were clear. "I'm tired of pretending it didn't happen. He's not taking anything else from me." Rachel met her in a cafe off Oxford Street. The two women sat in a corner booth, the air thick with unspoken memories. Nia slid a USB stick across the table, an old backup file from her internship. "It's one of his shows," she said. "Listen closely. You'll hear something no one else ever did." That night, Rachel listened. In the background of Vale's smooth broadcast, just beneath the music, a faint whisper, "Please stop." The police moved quickly after the article. By early dawn, they arrived at Vale's penthouse overlooking the Thames. He had been asleep when the knock came, 3 heavy pounds that shattered the quiet. When he opened the door, he was met by plainclothes officers holding a warrant. Cameras outside captured the moment he was led away in cuffs, head bowed, face hidden behind dark shades. The news channels replayed the footage on loop. Marcus Vale, 59, charged with multiple counts of sexual assault spanning over 30 years. Each word carved another piece from his legend. Rachel watched from her flat, her laptop open, notifications flooding in. There was no triumph in her expression, only a quiet, heavy certainty. Leanne called that afternoon, her voice breaking halfway through. "He's finally out of the booth," she said. Rachel didn't reply. There was nothing to celebrate, not yet. Meanwhile, in the echoing corridors of Radio Zenith, employees cleared out decades of archives. Vale's shows were pulled from streaming platforms. His voice, once everywhere, became nowhere. For the first time in 30 years, silence filled his time slot. And yet that silence felt cleansing. Vale's lawyer released a statement claiming his client was deeply shocked by the allegations. Privately, Vale told a friend, "They're trying to erase me." But deep down, he knew it wasn't erasure. It was revelation. The trial opened under grey skies at the Old Bailey. The courtroom was packed, journalists, advocates, survivors, former fans. Every seat taken. Cameras waited outside, broadcasting every arrival. Inside, the air was taut with history. Marcus Vale sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit, dreadlocks neatly tied, expression unreadable. His attorney, sharp and confident, whispered strategy. Across the aisle sat the women who had carried their silence for decades, Leanne, Nia, and others whose faces the press had never seen until now. The prosecution painted Vale as a man who had used power as currency, trading opportunity for control. He promised dreams, the barrister said, and delivered nightmares. The defense countered that the relationships had been consensual encounters misconstrued through the lens of time. When Leanne took the stand, the courtroom went still. She spoke of the girl she'd been, 17, trusting, eager to be seen. She described the studio light flickering as the lock clicked behind her. When asked why she hadn't reported it then, her voice quavered. "Because he was Marcus Vale," she said simply. "And I was nobody." The judge let the silence linger. After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman's voice trembled slightly as he read the verdicts. Guilty on 3 counts of rape. Guilty on 2 counts of indecent assault. Guilty on 1 count of sexual assault. A collective breath swept the courtroom, a sound like release. Marcus Vale's eyes flickered, but his expression stayed rigid. Only his hands betrayed him, clenched, trembling. The judge's words were final: life imprisonment. You used fame as a weapon. Now you will live with its silence. Outside, reporters shouted questions that vanished into the chaos. Leanne stood beside Nia and Rachel, surrounded by flashing cameras. Rachel recorded no notes that day. She just stood with them, head bowed. In the weeks that followed, The Sound of Silence, a podcast adaptation of Rachel's investigation, became a global phenomenon. Not because of scandal, but because of the women's courage. Vale's name faded into history, but their voices endured. Months later, the noise had faded. Rachel met Leanne and Nia at a quiet cafe in Brixton, a corner table near the window, the smell of rain and coffee mingling. The three women talked not about the trial, but about life. Nia's decision to start law school, Leanne's community choir, Rachel's next story, this time about resilience instead of ruin. Outside, a street musician strummed a soft tune. Leanne recognized it instantly, an old song Vale had once played on repeat. For a heartbeat, all three women fell silent. "You know," Leanne said, stirring her tea, "I used to think silence meant weakness. But sometimes it's just rest." Rachel smiled. Nia reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Outside, traffic hummed, laughter rose, a siren wailed in the distance. Life moved on, but it moved differently now, carried by voices that had once been unheard.